Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hello, bookish friends, and welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are ready to start our second official book of the podcast with The Day of the Triffids. So, this is the book that we will be discussing today. This is a sci fi horror and a classic sci fi horror. So, we haven't read a classic yet on the podcast. So we are very excited about it. And we're going to discuss that today. But before we get to that, we always have our bookish bite of the week. So we're going to do that first. And Leandra, my question for you is, how do you decide what books you're going to pick up? So is it mood reading? Is it you have to have like a set TBR every month, every week? How do you normally choose what reads you're going to be picking up?
Oh my goodness. It changes every day, every week, every month. I feel as though we start off the year with certain plans for how we're going to read, especially with you and me being booktubers. We are very familiar with TBR games, setting up TBRs for a month, even seasonal TBRs. You'll see people set up a winter TBR, a summer TBR. And as much as I love consuming those and I love setting up a TBR just to have something in mind, I would say I lean more mood reading. I'm trying to get better about prioritizing important reads, especially as our schedules get ever more complicated, especially when you're reliant on the library. You have a deadline. You need to read this book when you borrow it. So, mood reading, I think, is something that is ideal. It's preferred, but depending on circumstances, you can't always be a mood reader. One thing I will do is that even though I have a set schedule, I need to read certain books for projects or just because I want to try them in time. If I find myself too restricted, maybe I'm having a 2-star read, a DNF, things aren't going as they should be, I will suddenly stop everything and pick up something I'm in the mood for just to clear the palate. And
Yeah.
that can be really helpful. But I am trying in a weird way to become more of those TBR strict readers where I don't just set a TBR because it's fun. I set a TBR because I want to check it off. I actually want to accomplish this. So it means something. How about you?
Yeah, I have to set a TBR because the majority of my reads come from my library, and so it does help me with like making sure I have accessibility to or I have access to all of the books that I'm planning on reading for the month. But I do also put like little things within my library. Like if there's a book that someone mentions and I'm like, ooh, I really want to read that, I will put a hold on it because I am lucky my library does allow me to have a lot of holds at a time. And so I will just put random holds out. And then whenever the book comes in, it's almost like a little bit of a surprise. And if I am in the mood to pick it up, I will. And if not, I can hit that little deliver later button. So that's kind of how I live. I also love lists. And so I create TBRs not only because I need the structure for my library holds, but also because I love to have like a little checklist that at the end of the month I can see, "Oh, I made this list and I got all of my objectives done, or, maybe it was a bad month and I didn't get any of them done. I do like the idea though of I've had some months where you just have book that you're not enjoying after book you're not enjoying after book you're not enjoying. And I think that was May last year because we were calling it Meh May. And I do think that it would be smart to just clean the slate and be like, okay, I'm just going to start over. We're going to do something completely different, pick up something off the wall. And that might help me because I do tend to get in like not slumps because it's not that I'm not wanting to read, but just I have like dips in my ratings or really highs in my ratings. I'll have like 3 5 stars in a row and then you're kind of on a high.
And I think it speaks to as well, depending on the type of books you're reading. Like when I get a dip, I see myself trying to get a bit more out of my comfort zone, which isn't a bad thing. And you kind of do have to plan to get out of your comfort zone. I don't think that there's a time where you are in the mood to read something that's clearly not for you. So there are times where when you're planning to like mentally prepare yourself, get into a genre, get into an author that is new to you, you don't know what to expect. So when things go awry, that just happens. So having a bit of, I don't know, like a mood reading check-in is smart.
Yeah.
I even did that with, so back in December, I was doing my murder miss vlogs for BookTube, and there was a time when I DNF'd 2 books in a row. They were 2 authors I'd never tried before, so I didn't know what I was getting into. And I was thinking, this is not going well. I'm going to end the year not enjoying my reads, and I didn't want to do that. So I went on my app as well, on my Libby app, seeing what was available, downloaded a book that has been kind of on my radar. I knew it was going to be very different from the books I was reading as well. That was key. And then I read it within 24 hours, and I was like, clearly I was in the mood for this. This was great. I'm so excited. So there is a little bit of that where I think mood reading, the loveliness of it is its spontaneity. Like, for instance, the idea that you can just, check available now on Libby, see what's there, whether you're looking for an ebook, an audiobook, and just starting something. That is a really lovely luxury, but you have to be okay with possibly reading a book that isn't currently popular, that it doesn't have a laundry list of people already waiting for it. In fact, this is actually a great discussion in preparation for next month, the Games Gods Play. We were talking about that earlier. We have to prepare for it. And I realized that for a couple of my libraries that I'm a member of, I have a 15-week wait, a 10-week wait, but one pesky library has it available right now. And I was just thinking, but I don't need it right now. I don't need it right now. What am I going to do? So what I did is I put it on hold at one of the other libraries for 10 weeks. I borrowed the other one and just was thinking, maybe, just maybe I could, renew it, or, keep an eye out elsewhere, because what are we meant to do? So that's another thing. Mood readers, there's a luxury of you having access to the things you're in the mood for.
Yes, exactly. I do love that available now button on Libby because it does, especially if you create like subfolders. Krista was
Mm.
talking about that from Books and Jams, about how she always has these like subfolders of all these different books that she's interested in, and she'll just go into there and click, available now, and she can see the books that are on like a sub TBR, things that she's interested in that she just hasn't gotten a chance to read yet. So anytime she is having one of those mood reader moments, she can go into her set TBRs that are for, a year or whatever,
Mhm.
and find a book that she is already interested in.
That is really smart. I knew that she had subfolders, but I didn't realize that part of that is you look in your subfolder and then you still have the filtering options. So you
Yeah,
can click and go, oh, well, I know what I can't do it today. I'm too busy. There are too many things I got to get done. But as soon as I have a free moment, that is very sneaky. That's a great hack. So yeah, Krista, if you're listening, we're huge fans, and I'll definitely be doing that in the future.
absolutely. Well, with that, would you like to introduce our read this month, which is Day of the Triffids?
I would love to. So, as you mentioned, this is sci-fi horror, and we have a very new republished edition. It's really gorgeous, actually. The cover is lovely and eye-catching, but also simple, a bit cartoony. Almost reminds me of those old-fashioned, like, horror kind of comics you might get. But the original pub date is 1951, so it's from the 1950s. I'm excited about that because in the intro, we'll get into it. There are discussions of influence with like the Cold War and such, which is really fascinating to me. But let's read the back of the book. I'm going to read the synopsis and we're going to react, cold react. We have no idea what to expect. And I'm really excited for this. So let's get into it. Bill Mason undergoes eye surgery and awakes the next morning in his hospital bed to find civilization collapsing. Wandering the city, he soon realizes that surviving this new world requires evading strangers and the 7-foot tall plants known as Triffids. Plants that can walk and can kill a man with one quick slash of their poisonous stingers. The inspiration for 28 Days Later and countless post apocalyptic novels, this is the influential masterpiece of one of the 20th century's most brilliant science fiction and horror writers. What are our initial thoughts? What are you thinking, Danny?
There's killer plants.
Yes.
I love that. I think that that's fantastic. I don't care about anything else. That's what I am intrigued by.
And they're 7 feet
Although
tall.
yes.
They're huge, they're trees. Are they plants or are they trees at that point?
Right. The fact that so, like, at the very top of the back of the book, it says, "What if a meteor shower left most of the world blind and humanity is at the mercy of the mysterious carnivorous plants?" So that too, like, we have a little bit of I mean, that's gonna be an adjustment for a ton of people because it's not like you're born blind, you don't have the coping skills to deal with not having vision, and so that's gonna be interesting too. How do they, you know, how do they survive? Some of them probably won't.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure we're gonna see some, like, very, I don't know, morbid and also maybe sad deaths, possibly accidents, where there is the fear of the Triffids, but at the same time, there's this completely related but unrelated issue of this mass blindness. I also loved this mention of inspiration for 28 Days Later and countless post-apocalyptic novels, not just novels, but also TV shows. I mean, if we
Yeah,
wanna talk about the blindness for a second, the book The Blindness, that
yeah,
is a post-apocalyptic type of horror book in itself, where it's more, I think, a disease that leads people to become blind. I haven't read that book, mainly because I don't think I want to, from what I've heard about it. Just it doesn't seem like it's my cup of tea. But even the opening scene that this synopsis describes, Bill Mason undergoes eye surgery and awakes the next morning in his hospital bed to find civilization collapsing. I don't know if we have any Walking Dead fans in, listening in, but that's how The Walking Dead opens. I also haven't read the comics. I actually haven't read any of the original literature, but I've seen the TV show, and
yeah.
literally, our sheriff main character wakes up from a coma and realizes that zombies have just taken over the world, and he's like, what is going on? So I find that very interesting, and I it makes me wonder what other, pieces of literature,
Yeah.
TV, movies have been inspired. Isn't there a book called The Happening, or not a book, but a movie with, who is it? Is it Mark
Yes.
Wahlberg? Who's in that movie?
I'm not sure. I've never seen it, but I've heard people talk about that.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
isn't that
ended up watching it with a friend, and this was years and years ago, so I may have some of the plot incorrect. But a lot of it is regarding the plants reacting to the climate crisis, how humans are causing
yeah,
issues, damaging flora, fauna, causing mass extinction. And so the plants end up fighting back, they evolve. And it's related to the fact that there are some plants that can give off a certain pheromone that leads other, maybe wasps or other creatures to defend the plant, being, triggered to do that.
yeah,
And the entire book, I keep calling it a book because we talk about books all the time. The movie, I promise I watch things. The entire movie follows these, humans realizing that the reason why there's been actually like mass unaliving, we'll call it, is because there's been a pheromone in the air that the plants have been triggering within humans because they see humans as a threat. So I'm just thinking that feels very reminiscent of this in a very different way. But yeah,
yeah,
I'm really excited because this feels like it is a pivotal sci-fi horror, especially when we're talking about dangerous flora.
yeah. The blindness factor, as soon as you started talking about that, it reminded me of Bird Box, which I
Oh
haven't
yeah.
read the book, but I've seen the movie, and even though they weren't blind in that, they did have to cover their eyes because of
Mhm.
what was happening in the world, and so people did have to figure out, "How do I survive? How do I travel from point A to point B without being able to see my surroundings?" And, as we are in the technology age, without using GPS because we can't open our eyes, we have to hide everything. And I'm sure in instances like that, technology isn't going to work anyway, but there are so many things, so many factors that our characters are going to have to navigate because of, how life used to be.
Oh, sure. It also does seem a bit, not ironic, but kind of interesting that as the world is becoming blind, we have a main character who's just undergone eye surgery. So
Yeah.
what's that about? He, I'm assuming, might have been, visually impaired at some point. I want to know more about that surgery, and this kind of idea, it almost makes me think of fate, right? That he's meant to be this leader, and I don't know, of whatever's about to happen. And the fact that it is this like crazy, I don't know, like green meteor that's also described in the introduction. On that note, let's get into the introduction. So our edition, not everyone will have access to it. So if you can, maybe try to gain access to it, or just gain access to the intro from Jeff Vandermeer, because it is pretty insightful. I love the fact that Jeff Vandermeer, a well-known modern day sci-fi writer, is providing a perspective, a reaction to one of, the pivotal sci-fi horror works that likely also inspired him, an author who's also created dangerous flora and fauna in his work Annihilation and others. So the way that Jeff Vandermeer describes the Triffids is so fascinating, and I didn't expect this, but he talks about the fact that it reminds him of his own garden. There is a description within his intro where he says, "This may be why no one tries to eat a Triffid in the novel," because they're talking about how, they're dodging these Triffids, they're poisonous. Yet, as someone who has rewilded his yard and dealt with a host of invasive plants, the Triffids raised the hairs on the back of my neck because they seem familiar. When you battle plants every day that grow aggressively, the idea of a large plant with an unknown agenda doesn't seem improbable. It seems very much possible. The genius of Wyndham's creation of Triffids lies less in any alien origin than in how the Triffids simply accelerate and make visible processes occurring in nature right now. So he's saying that this is too familiar. We can recognize this in the issue that we have with invasive species nowadays, and also in 1951. This is something that is very relatable even today, and we can apply it to the issues that we're having with the climate crisis as well, with the fact that we have self-made climate issues. It's a human issue caused by humans. And he even relates it in modern day to the fact that not long ago, we were dealing with the pandemic. It's still ongoing in its own way, but with lockdowns, with massive waves, the fact that there was mass hysteria, lack of information, and the information we did receive, sometimes there were questions of whether it could be believed, whether it should be trusted. And the same thing is happening with these Triffids. He mentions that people are having a hard time processing and trusting the information they're learning about these things. So I find it really fun that a lot of times sci-fi, no matter when it's published, it is applicable to today,
Yeah.
because it's predictive, but it's also reactive to what has happened. So I'm so excited. Can you tell? I'm so excited about this.
I think that for me, some of the sci-fi that we've read, or even the fantasy that we've read that has plants as, part of the aggressors within the book is very interesting because we do live in, we live amongst the plants. And
Mhm.
so having something that seems very docile, but then from his perspective as a gardener, they're not docile. And actually, you reading that made me kind of cringe a little too, because I know that like every year when winter passes and spring starts coming and I have to go out to my landscaping to pull weeds, I'm like, I have to do this every year. So the fact that that can be interpreted into an aggressive and, maybe evolutionary plant that would come after people or houses or, whatever is kind of believable.
Oh, and you know what's really sinister and scary that I just thought of is, so we have humans dealing with blindness in this book. We don't know to what extent yet, but just the description you gave, where you say, okay, so winter has, of course, like caused all of the plants to go dormant, and everything is silent, everything's fine, and then spring comes, this idea of renewed life, and then you have this silent invader, right? These plants that should not be there, these weeds that you have to clean up, and I just remembered plants don't make a noise. So wait a second, these alien plants are going to be, moseying around 7 feet tall. And we have people who are blind who have to rely on hearing their other senses, touch. Uh, how is, oh no, that is terrifying that we are dealing with creatures that literally don't make a sound, unless in this world these like evolved plants do make sounds, and even that is terrifying because I have no idea. It's not like they're going to bark, whatever sound they make is probably going to be very unsettling.
Well, and does that lead our like, as one of the coping strategies to survive or the survival strategies, I guess, maybe people would have to go into locations that are protected because they are 7 feet tall. So maybe, as a human who is not 7 feet tall, if I can fit into a very small place, that's part of a protectant against these creatures because I could then hear them coming into my space. I don't know, that's just a theory, but maybe that happens.
Oh my gosh. And then what will be interesting too is that this is such a short book. We have to
Yes.
acknowledge it's only, at least our edition's only about 230 pages. So we're reading what, like 70, 80 pages a day. So I'll be interested to see how well developed it gets, how quick the action is, and if the questions that we're already posing are considered by John Wyndham. Is he going to address all of them? Is he going to address enough of them where we feel satisfied? And yeah, because our mind is already reeling and we've only read 2 paragraphs on the back of the book. So I'm crossing my fingers for this one. I'm really hoping that it ends up paying off. But even if we find some issues, again, it's also set, or at least it was published in 1951. So keep in mind, not everything will age well. I'm prepared, especially when we're dealing with a disability. This
Yeah.
idea of forced blindness on people, we need to be prepared for that. I'm wondering, yeah, just how well developed it's going to be, but we can also acknowledge this is almost acting as a stepping stone. Other
Right.
authors, including Jeff Vandermeer, have stood, on the shoulders of giants, original sci-fi writers. So it'll be important for us to also like try to pull where we can from there and just appreciate what this started and where it
Yeah.
came from, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, friends, if you are interested in reading The Day of the Triffids with us, we do read about a third of the book each month, or not each month, each week. Oh my goodness. It does not take us 3
We
months
like
to
to
read.
read very slow, very thoroughly.
So, for next week's episode, next Friday, we will be reading the first 5 chapters. So, that's the first chapter is End Begins. And the last chapter that we will get through is A Light in the Night. If you have the same edition as us, that's through page 81. And then if you want the rest of the schedule for this read, we will have that in the description for you guys. So we hope that you will read along with us or at least enjoy in the discussions if you don't plan on reading with us. And thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. And we will see you next Friday. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra _ the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.